This is Me, I Am Mental, the podcast. A quick disclaimer. The content you find here is neither intended to be therapy or diagnosis. It is provided for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to yet another episode of Me, I'm Mental, the podcast where we discuss all things mental health. My name is Charles Adede.
And my name is Darren Collins. And we're so glad that you could be here with us today again. Just like to remind you a couple of quick things is that you can go to meiammental.me to find out all the different things that we're doing with Me I Am Mental. That includes the podcast, special links to articles and advice columns not written by Charles and I. No, we're just here to present another voice in the place where we think there is space for talking about mental health and how we can sort of exercise that muscle of mental health in the peripheral sort of subjects that come up around mental health. But having said that, we are available on all the social medias, and you can find us easiest of all at meiammental.me.
Yes.
So that's an okay start, isn't it, Charles?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Darren. So today we are very honored to have our very first male guest. For some strange reason, in all our previous episodes, it's been ladies who have been our guests, and we've been hunting around for that one man who's going to show up.
Our inaugural fellow. To
So
balance out all this content. So.
Isn't it? So that we can just be, rough and rowdy
So we have the poet, Rix.
Yes.
Thank you.
Rix Poet. His official name is Onyango Otieno. But his trade name is Rix Poet. We will get into that in due course. We're very, very excited to have him here. Rix is an old hand when it comes to mental health issues. And to that extent, I really applaud him because he is a pioneer in many ways. We are just joining in to, once recently someone told me that no awareness is too much awareness, especially when it comes to things mental health. Rix, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes. As usual, we tend to start with wanting to know a little more about you, your personal story, because I'm aware that your personal story does have a bit of a mental health aspect to it, and our viewers, that's how what we would like most of our viewers to know, that we are all humans, we are all dealing with something, that when somebody is here, sitting here, they're not sitting necessarily as someone who has had an easy ride of life or has everything figured, but they're human and they're willing to be vulnerable, and which hopefully also gives everybody a chance to be vulnerable about mental health. And that way we will then generally embrace mental health as a thing and do the right things around it. Rix, karibu sana.
Asante.
Tell us everything. Start from the beginning. Where were you born? Who are your parents? Who are your grandparents? I'm kidding. But you know what I mean.
There's a lot of info in there.
Yes.
Well, Rix, I was born in Nairobi at Pumwani Hospital. My parents lived in Kitengela, that's Kajiado County today.
Mm-hmm.
And I am the firstborn of 3 kids. I have 2 amazing siblings, a gentleman and a lady who's 20 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, both my parents are alive. I don't know where my father is, though, but my mom is okay, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
We grew up in a complex home. It was complex. There were happy days. There were crazy days. The happy moments included the evenings that I took walks with my dad as he held my hand, and we were just visiting neighbors' homes and having lots of tea and banter. Days when he would put me on our living room table and switch on his Sanyo radio and put some Alus Mabele and tell me to dance for him. They were the best days. Days which we would sit down to watch the Bundesliga together. And he would choose a team and I would choose mine. And because we had a black and white TV, so mostly he'd be like the black team and I'd be the white team. And I used to look forward to those kind of weekends. My father was a gymnast when he was younger, very active in sports. Both my parents, actually. I guess that's one of the reasons why I developed a love for sports from a very young age. Mm-hmm. So I was into football from as far back as I can remember. 6, 7 years old, I started playing the game and got into athletics as well. So I've been very active sports-wise through the years. Both my parents are teachers as well. My mom is a kindergarten teacher. My dad is a primary school teacher. By those days, he was teaching GHC. That's for the older guys in the room. That would be geography, history, and civics, which is now known as social studies. Okay. And sometimes I think it's because of his subject that I also developed a kind of curiosity about people, because he taught about people, he taught about culture, and he was a very charismatic guy. My father, to date, he's still a very charismatic guy. I was born also in a Catholic home, so when my dad was younger, he was an altar boy. His father did not want him to be a priest, so he said one day when he came home drunk. So perhaps I will not be here if my grandfather did not intervene. Maybe he would have gone on to be a priest. But today also I hear priests have kids and whole families.
When I grew up, my best friend's mom and dad was a former nun and former priest.
There you go.
And the birth dates when they got married, and the baby happened,
something's not adding up.
It added up quite well.
Yeah.
They told the story without telling the story.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's happening even here. Like, priests have secret families that they take care of, and we know about this stuff. But officially, we're glad that Granddad didn't go down. Officially, Yeah. And so, I mean, those are like among the great highlights I had as a child. Yes. On the other dark side of that moon, there were many incredible nights of war, I would say, even in that home. Because again, my dad loved the bottle. He'd come home many times drugged by his friends, and that would be a Saturday night, and on Sunday morning he's reading announcements in church at the pulpit, and the next day they're fighting with mom, and mostly they'd fight about money, they'd fight about alcohol, and they'd fight about women. All right, and they were nasty fights. So when I was 6, 7, 8, I couldn't make up so much about what's going on, so there's nothing I could do. But then I remember they got worse and they got worse. By the time I was 10, now I had a clear sense of, oh my gosh, these people are actually fighting, and it's very unpredictable when like the fights would come up. You would just be home and you think, oh, today I'm going to have an ordinary evening. Mm-hmm. And then before you know it, chaos. People are on the wall to wall, and they're, strangling each other, and it's fists and it's crazy abusive words they're exchanging, and you're just watching all this mayhem helplessly. And sometimes because I was quite overprotective over my mother. I would try to, intervene in the fights, and I'd just be thrown away like a fly.
Firstborn.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And man, it was crazy. It was crazy. So I wished I could control a lot of it. And I was not aware of how that was going to affect me later in my life, because just that part of wanting to control what was happening at home, how it affected me later in life. But outside that, my father was also quite abusive to me, physically, emotionally. He'd beat me up with all his demons. And my father was really angry. He was angry. He was angry at so many things that he didn't have a language for. And I just didn't understand, really. One day in 1998, this year, one of Africa's biggest musicians called Kofi Olomide, who was a big favorite when all the music I knew was Lingala, had a hit song called Lua, of his album that had been produced in 1977. And I remember that year there was Jet Li's movie called Tai Chi Master, was like the thing we used to go to watch in those 5-shilling movie dens that were everything, man. Like they were everything, And so you just go to repeat the movie because you like to see these guys flying in the air and you're kicking about each other and stuff like that. And one evening, we used to stay in Huruma Estate, Eastlands, in a single room. This is so big, actually. Like it was like maybe 20 feet thereabout, and a really narrow 10-feet corridor for a kitchen. So that's where we used to stay, me, my mom, our house help or house manager, and my uncle, who was my mother's brother. And this evening, my dad comes home. I had just turned 10, according to my mother's account of this story. And I was really small-bodied and, quite calm, just as calm as I often look. And he comes home, he opens up these boxes of books that he had. So, he was obviously a teacher. He had many textbooks in the house, which made me hate reading, actually, because I was never exposed to creative reading.
Okay.
All the time it was always about, you gotta read, pass exams. So home actually felt like another school. I'm coming from school to another school. So I hated books. Literally, I really, really hated books. So he's coming home and he's, opening up all these boxes he had, and he's apparently looking for some novel, which I had seen, and it had it belonged to Bill Cosby. Now, in 1998, Bill Cosby was a household name.
Yes.
We used to watch his comedy, and, it would be like maybe what we would think of Trevor Noah today or something like that.
Which book was it? Was it himself? No,
I
40.
I'm thankful I don't remember because the trauma I have about that book. But it had a white cover. That's all I remember. It had a white cover, and he was there. I think his face was on the cover, and I can't remember anything else. He was also quite a charismatic guy, to be honest. And so my dad had borrowed this book from a kid he tutored, and I think he misplaced it and could not remember where he'd put it. So obviously, in a 4-cornered house, if a book is not under that roof,
So
somebody, it's either it's not in that house or somebody took it somewhere. And, in our African homes, sad to say, a suspicion can quickly move into accusation in a split second, So at some point in the night, my dad was like, ama ni wewe umechukua hiyo kitabu, Could you be the one who's taking this book? For me, I mean, if you remember board mass, that was enough stress for a class 6, 10-year-old, like small mathematics concepts. I had no business taking a novel anywhere. It was like a bank heist to me. Like, where am I taking a Bill Cosby novel?
Right.
You know? And I hated books. There was nothing I needed to do with them anyway. Let them stay in school. And my father is like, who else is going to school in this house? Mm-hmm. And of course, it's only one person. Can your mother steal a book? Can your uncle steal a book? Can the house help steal a book? You're already cornered. And he's like, you must be the one who took that book because I need it and I need to get it back to the owner. So sometimes I was cheeky as a kid, you know? I mean, you'd steal 5 shillings here to go buy mutura and stuff like that, and, you know, sweets and biscuits and all that. You're developing, you're curious, you want your own independence and stuff like that. But then to be like on that day, I was sure
it wasn't you.
I had not stolen this book. I really was sure. And my dad had this thing, like when he got angry, his eyes would just get bloodshot, you know, and he was really scary. And he could even gaslight you into believing you actually made a mistake or you did something that you're sure you didn't do, you know? So I was used to being beaten, but then that day it was a little different. Our mothers used to hang clothes with these telephone copper wires, like the ones that have rubber outside, and you know them, and they would keep rolls and rolls of them on the balconies, just in case the ones that are there, I don't know, you know, get cut or something.
And I still think they're the best
hanging wires,
because everything else you get these days just lasts 2 weeks and then it's, but those ones would go
they were long lasting, sustainable, I might say.
Yes,
So I mean, my mother had rolls and rolls of them like outside the balcony, and my father walked out and he came back to the house and he said, you have to produce that book. So he starts beating me, and what was different about this day is he stripped me of my clothes, all right, 10-year-old, and he starts whipping my body.
with the wires.
With the wire, with the copper wire. Man, and that guy, man, like, you know the way you'd want to kill a snake? That's how he used to beat, you know? Like, everything that made him angry in his life would come to that moment, you know? And it was mad crazy. So many times he was very unstoppable when he got to that state. My mother would be helpless. My uncle would be helpless. You're living in his house anyway. He's the breadwinner. And it was crazy. So 15 minutes into this crazy beating, I'm bleeding, I'm crying, I'm sweating, and I can feel my body disintegrating. And I'm like, today, if I don't do something today, I'm not sure how far this guy is willing to go, because he's determined to get this book out of me by some magic, you know? So I think it was the first time I had to lie to get out of a situation from something I actually didn't do, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't do it, and I was just scared for my life, because maybe I'd have died that day, you know? My child intelligence is telling me you have to save yourself. So I say I took it. I just say I took it. And he's flabbergasted, and he looks at me and he says, you know, I'll do something to you that you will never forget. So he walks out, and then he comes back with a sisal rope as if he'd planned all this. So I'm on the floor, I'm like, you know, and in a naked body that's bleeding and sweating and crying, poor boy. And he comes with this sisal rope and he ties my hand. And he gets to the kitchen, he comes out with the kerosene jerrycan, paraffin kerosene. I don't know which one you use. Yeah. Darren. But, this
What
5
do-
liter
What do Americans call kerosene?
That's what we call it.
That's what we
kerosene,
call it?
Yeah.
cool.
Okay.
And with a matchbox, and he opens up the lid and pours some of that kerosene into it and smears some of it on top of my hand and lights up the matchstick, and puts the flame on top of my hand. Okay, so I have this scar. If you have that look. And I think my brain blocked out the depth of the pain of that moment because I really do not remember it. But I just know, I remember the next day my mom trying to bandage me and I could not go to school for like 2 weeks.
Sorry, may I interject?
Yes,
with a
please.
question?
Ask it.
This is extremely harrowing. But your mom was present during
Yeah.
this. She was just watching.
Yeah, everybody was watching. The adults in the room were watching.
Did you have your siblings were there? as
No,
well?
so this is 1998. My brother was 3 years old. And I can't remember him in that room as well.
How old is your dad at this time?
This man was born in 1965. I'm poor at math.
Okay.
1965, 1998.
So you're okay.
Yeah,
So carry on.
yeah.
So
And so, I cannot get outside for like 2 weeks. But then that night when this thing happened, I felt like something tore inside me that I had no language for. And I changed. Everything changed. The way I saw my mom changed. The way I saw my dad changed. Even my uncle to some extent. The world, everything just changed. Because I imagined, man, like if this is home and these things can happen to me here, how about the rest of the world where
Yeah.
people don't know me? That's a 10-year-old thinking. You're trying to process, like, I don't understand, And so for me, many times I count that as the focal point of the childhood trauma, like the real root, because I can really remember myself changing. I was a very outgoing boy, such a playmaker, very exciting and all that. And then I just withdrew, completely became an introvert, And so I was scared to go outside. My body wanted to, but I was scared. Anytime there was a football tournament, I was scared to ask for permission from my dad. Like everything just changed, And I mean, the violence at home went on. It was so normal there, like they fighting and sometimes like the extended family comes and have like they have meetings with them, and my dad would say, oh, I'm a very good person, I've never wronged anybody, none of you will teach me how to run my family, and so I mean that's defeat. You can't do anything about it, and it's a very high level narcissism that robbed me of my childhood. And it went on until I was 16 years old, when now depression was starting to kick in. Now, like, there are physical manifestations of the trauma.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I just like to interject.
Yes,
to
please.
begin a question. So you, throughout all this, providing some comfort, or I'm a bit torn thinking of a mother watching their child be. She was also being brutalized in her own ways.
Yeah.
During the fights with your dad.
Yeah.
But was your mom offering any type of comfort, or did you feel completely alone?
So it's a little complex, because I mean, tonight you watch me being battered, and the next morning you're bandaging my hand.
Yeah.
So
You feel like you should have intervened.
I was like, God,
I know.
that was too extreme. Like the whole process of my dad getting out, coming in, going to the kitchen, coming with the kerosene, somebody should have pushed him, like fight him again or something,
I know, right?
But fire on a child's hand, and he strikes the flame, and we are watching like it's a movie. And then, like, you can never tell that child not to hate his father, or not even to hate you. You can never tell that child what to do with his emotions. You can't. Somehow you actually relinquish some of your power over them. You get what I mean? But then, in our homes, children don't have voices. You follow what your parents say, more so what your father says, and your mother follows what your father says. And so all of you are these slaves of some demigod in the house who can decide to strangle you emotionally anytime he sees fit, you see. And yeah.
May I ask another question? So, because you had mentioned something about the possibility that the relationship between your dad and his own dad
Yes.
was not necessarily, the most cordial.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right in that?
Yes and no.
Mm.
Yes, in terms that, what I came to find out later in my 20s, when I actually wanted to start working on myself, I figured I need to get to understand this guy, first, to, separate myself from him and look at him as a human being first, because as kids, we idolize our parents. We, pedestalize them as well. And going back to find out, his father was also quite a violent person. And many of these stories never got to us grandkids. And he was a polygamist. Paternal grandpa was a polygamist with 3 wives. In Luo culture, if you have more than one wife, you can decide whether to erect their villages separately, or bundle them all together in one village. My grandpa decided everybody is going to be in this one large village that felt like a city, because those women had like 9-8 kids each.
Yes.
You get what I mean? So my dad had like 30 siblings, man. There were many people. And then the older brothers would still like be around with their wives in that same space. And some cousins that I have, I don't even know their names. Like, we are that many. So my dad grew up in a chaotic environment, and his father happened to have been a soldier in World War II, in what was called Burma then, for the British. And as I came to learn later as well, like, many of these African soldiers returned home with a lot of PTSD, and they were just left to their own devices. So I hear many stories of, like, grandfathers, like, they're sitting in their village and they're imagining the jet fights are coming, so they're taking cover. They're telling everybody to take cover under trees, under the tables and everything. And some of them, like my grandpa, took up alcohol to cope with the war that remained in the mind, you see. And that meant he could not be a present father. That, coupled with the fact that there were too many kids to give attention to. And my father happened to be the firstborn of the 3rd house. They were pretty close in some aspects. By the standards of their awareness, their relationship was cordial.
I see.
By the standards of their awareness. But if you asked me, those people didn't really know each other, because my own father would say he felt abandoned at a young age when his father could no longer pay his school fees. Of course, that separates you from somebody you love very much. And there was never a conversation about it. And so it was like older siblings trying to take you to school, and eventually you get out on your own and you try to make a life for yourself.
So in terms of him failing to pay his school fees, he just stopped, or was it because he couldn't?
He couldn't. He had retired, and at some point he could. Some of his kids were still in school, like high school, primary school, and he could no longer pay their fees.
I see.
Yes. So now it was the older siblings trying to take care of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he came from that kind of environment, and grandpa drank. In fact, he drank literally drank himself to death. That's what killed him, and he died a very sorry death as well, because the doctors kept telling him, you need to stop drinking, and he would send his grandkids in the village, and give them this opaque. So in our villages, like, liquor is sold like in the villages, so it's really easily accessible, and you just call your grandkid and you blind him with this 5 shillings, and then you give him the money to buy the liquor. And so with grandpa, he had his own house in the middle of the village, and so his wives had their own home. So they'd take turns who is going to sleep there depending on their own arrangements. But he stayed there alone most times, so he had his own privacy. And one evening, people are just chilling in the village, and they're sensing some kind of smoke coming from his house, and they're wondering, what's this mzee cooking? They go and check. They find that he's sat on a burning jiko. How do I explain a jiko?
Yeah, I get it.
You got a jiko. He's sat on a burning jiko, and his bottles are down there, and he can't feel himself. Like, his nervous system had crashed. So he's burning. His ass is literally burning, and he doesn't feel it. That's how far he'd gone with the alcoholism. But I reckon that for me, it's the trauma that kept eating at him, to the point where
The PTSD.
yes, he could no longer.
Also, would you reckon that if that's the environment your dad grew up in, so possibly his siblings as well?
100%. My
And
uncles,
therefore
man, they were
there's-
chaotic people, man. Yo, hey. And they don't like me for saying these things, But for me, I'm like, my cousins, all of us, we've grown up with this despair. Like, I have cousins who almost beat up their father for his violence at home. The man had to vacate the house, farm, like, for it to get there. Because also he was seeing another woman aside from their mother, and it was bringing all this chaos. So that's the kind of environment we grew up in, like me and my cousins, and we were just fed up of that shit, man, like really, really fed up. And so there was no information about stuff. And at some point, I felt like, man, I can no longer stay here. So I started running away from home.
Sorry, so going back to about age 15 or thereabouts, you say there was some sort of internal collapse, some creeping depression.
Yeah.
You became more aware that there's something really serious happening.
Well, aware is
Or
the
not.
safest. Aware is the safest word right now.
Yes.
But I noticed. Let's say I noticed something was off about me, because I was in high school. I got into high school. I was taken to Nyanza, like Western Kenya, so far away from home. Already, I feel abandoned in the house. So this was like double abandonment, feeling like I've been taken away to a boarding school so far away from home, and I still wasn't given the necessary resources I felt I needed to settle in school properly, comfortably. It felt like just being thrown away. And of course, your father is looking at it as going to school, But my zeal, and I was a really bright child, but my zeal for reading got out. Literally, I only had 2 things, because I was really good in languages. So I'd only spend time in the libraries and reading Swahili literature and English literature. And, that's the time I got interested in artistry and started writing music and stuff like that. But then there are periods which I did not go to class at all. I would just roam around school like somebody who'd lost his head, Like, you would not understand what's going on in this boy's head. I would not bathe even up to like 9 days, and I'd still play football. I was in the football team because I was that good. So like, they took us, like, if you were good as a Form 1, they took you into the school team. I was that good. So, get off the field, come to the dormitory, like erase the sweat off with my towel, put on some perfume and Vaseline and go to class for prep, you know. I did not do my laundry, so I would steal people's laundry, like clothes and everything. And at some point I was caught and expelled, you know. And even in exams, it was so funny that out of the 200 students of that stream, at the beginning of the year when we came, I was number 16 with my O-level grade. But then at the end of the year, I was in the bottom 10, but still first in languages, you know. So they had this system where, like, at the end of the year, they call out like the best students in every subject. And my name, I was there, like, yo, Onyango Otieno, Swahili, English. But then they'd read bottom 10 overall. And I'm still featuring, you know. And sometimes I just wonder, like, really, nobody sat down and asked themselves, like, this kid, something is going on with this kid. Nobody cared, because most times the folks in top 10, like bottom 10, like they flop in everything. You know, I already hate the grading system of our education and stuff. But really, you know, like there are too many signs to show. Like, I was brilliant in the field. I was brilliant in literature and the languages. I was brilliant in them. Sciences, darkness, like nothing. Like chemistry, biology, all the stuff, math, nothing. And I wasn't interested because the teachers were not even interesting people at all. Because I love stories. I really loved stories. So if you come to me just with figures and checks, I'm just like, get out of here, you know. But then I wished that there were more systems to sort of help kids like me in that transitional period when you're actually getting to understand yourself, understand your environment, and then taking up this part of your life that is secondary school, that is apparently very important for the next stage of your life and possibly career. I wish there were more processes to even check in with kids emotionally, because they're coming from all kinds of places into a secondary school. Many things going on inside them, but they don't know, they are not aware.
So if I may contribute a little to that, I don't know what, Darren, you think. You've been around and you've interacted with us a bit. What I think happens in our schools for the most part is the teachers themselves, most of them went through a system that did not recognize the emotions at all.
Yeah.
The teachers are there for very mechanical.
Yeah.
And then they also have a very straight, simple objective, which is to the mean score.
Yeah.
Is what they want.
Yeah.
Parents are also generally obsessing about the mean score and making sure kids get the A's and get to university.
Yeah.
So parents themselves are completely unaware of the emotional landscape. So you can see that at the point at which you're not normal, quote unquote, you don't fit a normal profile, you will just be considered sumbua.
Yeah.
That's it.
It ends there.
That's it. And I think your situation may be relatable to
Definitely.
millions of Kenyans.
Yeah.
I think many of us would feel like what you just said there is really resonates with them.
Yeah, I mean, every child has a lot to offer. That's something I know. Every child has a lot to offer. Whether they are abled or disabled, they have a lot to offer. Their life is something. They need support, all manner of support, all-rounded support. They need to be healthy, to be productive, to be children. You know what I mean?
And I suppose, in high school, it's trickier when you're a guy. Why am I saying that? So you're not the cute. You're growing into a man. You're in this. You're not a child. You're you're not fully a man. You're not the cutest thing around.
Of course, yeah.
You have all this random emotions
Yeah.
and what, and so it's easier for teachers or anybody who encounters you to think of you as being a thug as opposed to someone who needs help.
And it's true what you say, and I hypothesize that it has a deeper root than that, because with our history and how this formal education, my dad used to tell me that Africans used to be beaten to go to white schools, to go to school, and with that background, we carried a lot of trauma because it was taken that as a black person, if you talk against the colonialist, you're going to be killed. So we developed a survival mechanism for silence to survive, you know, and then it got inculcated into our cultures,
It becomes like
you know. So because generations are going, that becomes a truth that if you keep quiet, you live. You know what I mean? We don't say many things in Africa. We don't talk. We don't, you put it in, you know. But that's not human, you know. We are very expressive if you go, we are very expressive people.
Yeah, I've noticed that in my friendships living here, I'm almost becoming more quiet because if I do any amount of like venting, like a complaint, like I don't feel whatever, the responses I get back are either like just really strong opinions I'm not looking for about how to fix it now and get it over with, or just it just doesn't feel like it's natural just to I'm not doing too well. I start to feel like I don't even want to say anything about how I feel.
And so, you know, where the pain came mostly was many times it was like the men who were being taken out of their homes by the British, you know, and sometimes they had to go like to fight for freedom, and so our mothers remained home to do these parental roles. So there was more physical violence against boys and men with the colonial system, and that's just what got transferred into boys' high schools. Same administration, you know, and so that's also what the teachers got trained into, right? They just carried it forward. So, you know, now you look at a child and the first instinct is to victimize them.
Because I think for teachers, if I remember, like in my school, I always sensed that what teachers want is for the school to be orderly.
Yes.
It's not they're not even interested in
who you are,
in the students, and they just want to maintain law and order. That was, law and order and the grades. Yeah. So if it broke you, whatever it did to you, it was
so it really became like you became collateral damage.
Yes, in that sense.
In that sense. And to date, I mean, sometimes I can see those conversations happening like on Twitter here and there, but for our national consciousness, we are not really aware, especially for boys, the kind of chaos we went through in that transitional period of our adolescence with older boys who abused younger kids, and then when these younger ones got older, they did the same thing because cycles of violence and trauma, you know?
Well, before we get into the sort of the societal sort of issues, just personally for you, when did the introspection begin? I mean, you're at a way different place now than when you were 16.
Definitely.
Was there a moment? Was it a process?
Yeah.
Were you alone in that process, or did you have mentors? Like what?
Oh man, it was crazy. So I think like I was always curious. So okay, way before that, at 16 years old, I began writing. And by then it was just for release because
you were writing your feelings, your thoughts?
Yeah, poetry. I began writing my thoughts through poetry.
Well, how did you get that idea? I mean, was it because of the school literature?
So what was happening at that time was, first of all, like when I go to my primary school, I loved stories.
Okay.
And I was very good in Swahili. In fact, my first dream was to be a Swahili professor. I've never even said this anywhere. And I was very good. So, you know, in that Form 1 school, they asked us, like, what do you want to be? Because of the records, whatever. And I said, I want to be a Swahili professor. My maternal grandpa died knowing I wanted to be a Swahili professor. So because I spent a lot of time in the library reading literature, I got attracted to the arts that way.
Okay.
I felt like, because they had like poetry books in the library.
You remember the first book you read twice?
No, I can't. First book I read twice?
That you went, I got to read that again.
I remember a poem. And it was by a Ugandan poet called Okot Pibitek, Song of Lawino. The most essential piece you'll ever read in your life.
Okay.
I can't remember the first book I read twice, actually. I've done it, but I can't remember.
Okay.
So in that introspection...
Okot had this way of writing, which was very... it's a story.
Yeah.
But there is Lawino and Okol, and it's like the husband says his side of the story, and then the wife responds.
Yeah.
And the husband is sort of an educated sort of guy who has acquired British or European influences and carries himself with some airs and graces, and therefore is looking down on his wife. And then the wife is still this village woman. So very interesting. And then it's written in poetry, but it's got a very distinctly, I think, Afrocentric flavor, which I think there's 2 or 3 poets in Africa who do that. There's Taban, a guy called Taban Loliong, Okot Bitek, and Wole Soyinka.
Yeah. So that's a little background of the poem. So like in 2015, about your question on introspection, there had been another fight at home, and this time my dad had floored all my mom's clothes in their bedroom. On their bedroom floor, and her shoes and everything, so it was just really chaotic. And I think I was around 27. I was just about to turn 27. And I was really, really fed up with all this fighting. And so it was one of those times that now I was the one parenting my parents. So I decided to call them for a meeting, okay? Which is really suicidal, if I'm being honest with you. Here, you don't call your parents for a meeting to discuss family affairs.
You were like 17 or 18 years old.
27.
27, that's right.
Yeah, I'm still living with them. And my mother is a little softer, so we have a conversation with her because they were separate meetings. With my dad, it was always a risk. You never knew what was going to happen. And so he did agree to the meeting. We sat, and I mean, my mom was a little sick at that time, and he said very many unprintables about her, including she might be dying in August and blah, blah, blah. But then there was one statement he made that, to me, it changed my life. He said to me, and I quote, "I never come to you with my problems because you'll think I'm weak." That one line was it. I never come to you with my problems because you'll think I'm weak. Oh, explosive. I was like, wait a minute. Like, all these years, you've been thinking, I see you as a perfect person already. So that's why you don't talk to me. You know, all these years, I've been living with you. You don't think I know your weaknesses already, you know. And so I was curious, like, how would a man think like that? If you would imagine you're living with your child definitely sees you. They definitely see you. But for some reason, you want to block that and believe you keep to yourself, and your child would believe you're a very strong man. Come on, you know. I was like, where is that coming from? You know? And that's the first time I separate myself from him. And now I start looking at my father as a little wounded child as well.
So sorry, I actually want to take you back a bit, because that realization between how you come to that point means that there's a lot of processing you've been doing, even vis-a-vis yourself, even to the point of calling them.
Yes.
Feeling like you can call them to a meeting and have something meaningful to share with them. It means that you begin to feel like you are maturing in certain ways. You have acquired certain perspectives about life. There's a whole journey there. I just want to take you back a bit to how did you get to that point? What in the intervening years, from age 15, the poetry?
Yeah.
How did you get to that point where you thought, I can call these guys to...
Well, you see, when I was developing my writing pursuits, I eventually went back to school. And
sorry, what does that mean? You eventually went back to school?
I went back.
You stopped?
Yeah, I had been expelled, if you can remember.
Oh, yes,
yeah, I
you
got
had been
expelled at some
expelled,
point there from 2, and then I went back to school. And I was enrolled at Pumwani Boys High School, which is like next to Starehe Boys. And in that school, I felt a little more settled. So it felt more homely than our home, okay? And so I really thrived. I joined the journalism club there because I dreamed of telling stories. I dreamed of becoming a journalist. And so I was a day scholar at the time. And this is 2005. So what's happening in 2005 is South Sudanese SPLA leader John Garang dies in a helicopter crash, okay? And rumors are moving around that Uganda's president was involved in this accident, quote unquote, you know. And I followed John Garang a lot because of, the work he was doing for South Sudanese people. And so that incident sparks my political curiosities, all right? So I'm connecting your answer. So 1 year later, and I remember because I used to have these wall hangings of artistic things in my bedroom, and I put his picture there because, his death was really sad at the time. 2006, I'm in the journalism club in school. And what's happening in school is I'm the one writing the news. So we used to present news at the school parade. And people had a lot to say about what's going on in school that they were unhappy about, And so I was the news editor, and I would go sometimes buy newspapers to see what's happening like nationally and stuff like that, and incorporate it in the school. And we had we were like 2 of us, like newscasters, reading at the parade. It was really, really fun. So I'm starting to understand, like, there's a way systems operate, administrations, systems of power, dynamics. This is a way they operate when it comes to what our idea of leadership is, students' fraternity and administrations and how they operate and stuff like that, And then the government, in 2006, a guy called John Mishuki was, I think, head of a Minister of Internal Security, if I'm not wrong. So they raided the standard newspapers and KTN, which is like a major channel here. They are Mombasa Road and I&M Bank, okay? And so for me, at the time, like the Railas, the Orengos of the time, like they announced that there's going to be a protest, a march, to stand for media freedom. And because journalism was like really in my blood, I was like, today I'm not going to school. I'm going to the protest in my school uniform, And so that's what I did. I was in my Pumwani uniform, and I went, and we were there chanting for press freedom. I remember 2nd March 2006 was a Tuesday, and we did it. But what was happening to me at that time, I was juxtaposing the injustice happening outside with the injustice happening in our home. And I'm starting to see similarities between the way my father doesn't want us to speak, the government doesn't want us to speak. If you speak up, you're oppressed. If you speak up here, you're also oppressed. These things are connected. And I was 17 at the time. So then now I start analyzing my father with political consciousness as a 17-year-old. And then now I recognize, this is abuse. I can't do anything about it. So I try to talk to my uncles, and all of them fear him because he was a little richer than all of them. And so power dynamics can't work. And that's the despair. Actually, on top of the processing, it was the despair that I could no longer take the fighting anymore. I was worried for my siblings. I was worried for myself. I was worried for my dad and my mom as well. So that's kind of like how that processing had been happening, just comparing life at home and life outside and life in school. Life in like outside, like government and stuff, and relationship between state and its citizens, and then school administration, student fraternity, and analyzing that. And of course, the literature we were doing in school, at the time we were reading Coming to Birth by Marjorie Makuluthe, who passed on a few years ago. And even in the storytelling there was this political consciousness that we were being called to. And I was so deep into that stuff, really, really deep into it. So that's how I came to realize there was a maturity I had to see this is not right and it needs to be corrected. But then also the helplessness that I didn't have the powers to stop the violence at home.
Just as an aside, was there any blowback to you from attending the protest?
In your school uniform?
Nah, it was just one day, yes. And then we were really many guys in the street, and nobody knew I was in a protest.
Okay.
Not my father, not my school, nobody knew.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I was the editor of my school newspaper as well. We covered the fishing derby. That was about as complicated as things got.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I mean, it's a really, and so now just speaking about this so fluently and clearly, and it's almost like breathing to speak about these difficult truths. And you got there on your own?
No.
I mean, okay.
So when I was around 23 years old, now I had enrolled because after my O-level, I went to Uganda, I did A-level, then I came back. I wanted to go to Daystar because I wanted to go into journalism school. Mm-hmm. My father managed to pay like half the school fees for the first semester. So I went to school and milked all the hours I could out of the campus. Then I had to drop out at some point. So I was just in and out of school and, finally dropped out. But the fighting at home was getting worse every day. Mm-hmm. This is around 2012 now. And I remember as a dean in the school, I approached them to tell them that I was really struggling mentally. Mm-hmm. And they referred me to a psychologist who was based in the school, the campus.
Right. This is at Daystar?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was the first time that I spoke to a professional about what's going on. And of course, I think he felt limited in what he could do because of, the arrangement in school and all that. They didn't have like a counseling for this kind of thing. But then to have somebody just listening to me was something, and then in that school period I met my friends, my male friends, who in the beginning we wanted to start a Bible study. I'm 21, 22 years old there, 23 thereabout, and in those sessions we realized all of us had issues with our fathers. Mm-hmm. And this commonality now creates a bigger space to speak about our emotional struggles. And for me, that was my first saving grace, because for the first time in my life, I could speak and people validate me
Yeah.
for the first time in my life. Like there was chaos going on. By then we didn't have WhatsApp. So Facebook had, like you could open these closed groups.
Yeah.
So we had a closed group, and whenever there was fighting 3 a.m. in the house, I would just, because I got anxious and you want to go and protect your mom and all that and stop the fighting, I would just write in the group and somebody would wake up in the morning and just talk to me through it. So in those Bible study sessions, before we'd get into reading the Bible, we would ask each other how we are feeling, how the week was, you know. And I remember, like, I always had some outrageous story from home.
Right.
This had happened and that had happened. And so we made humor out of it to sort of help us sanitize the depth of the gravity of the situation, because they were really harrowing. But that's how I got through it in the beginning. And this male group were the first safe community that I got. And I mean, we've been friends for the last 10, 12 years through it. And so that, and then after that, I, followed my poetry pursuits. And that's actually, one of the reasons I'm a bit known here and there in the country. I began performing my poems, and my poems were really about what was going on at home. So they were very emotional and incredibly vulnerable, and I do that in my writing to date, you see. And so I gained communities out of this vulnerability, digital vulnerability that I was exhibiting. Yeah.
Do you feel like for men, I mean, it's right now, so far in the story, your path that I've heard has been meeting with men, and actually being able to be open about it. When you are open with poetry, do you feel like most of the guys that end up absorbing your poetry are already receptive, or do you break, or is there any breakthroughs for people who are just like respond to you like, I never thought of that?
Yeah, and so I do both. I mean, the poetry and storytelling, and in both there is a lot of positive response to the relatability of my experiences. And many men actually say they feel they can trust me with their stories. Right. As a result,
Sometimes I wonder, like, because I've done a lot of performance artists. Most of the crew here, we do performing arts, and it's for education. But art tends to preach to the choir a little bit. Yeah. Like guys who are already into poetry come to poetry events. Yes. And so that's sort of with the mental health thing that Charles and I have been trying to pursue with guys, is like, how do we get an entrance for the common guy who isn't necessarily in touch with his feelings at all, and would be receptive, but how to draw them in? Do you feel like you're getting new converts through poetry? People who I don't even know how to phrase the question.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
To answer that question as a creative, in connection to getting to more people with awareness, there has to be more that we do than just the writing. We have to go to people. We have to understand their contexts, their cultures, their realities. We have to go to them, And one of the things that has helped me is I talk to lots of people. Like, I really talk to lots of people. I have this on my Instagram, like, sometimes I ask people to ask me questions anonymously, for example. And, it helps that I can't see their names. So they tell me, they say all this, asking for advice about different things. Yeah. And they are very true connections and conversations. And I find that many times, people would love to get solutions to their problems, but the first step is earning trust. The first step is to feel validated. The first step. And so sometimes with poetry, we are telling the story of what happened, but then there's a gap around this part that trust is needed
to be
be created and stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because even with your father's statement before, when he was like, I can't let you know that I'm weak.
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
Yeah.
so there's no trust there that's okay.
Yeah.
There's no sense of like you're gonna fall into arms that are receptive and not someone who's gonna reject you.
Exactly.
So is it trust? Is it rejection? I mean, where's the intersection of like feeling like people will push you away? Is that what you mean by trust? Like you're not gonna blame me. You're not gonna be mad at me. You're not gonna laugh at me.
Yeah. Shame me.
Yeah. Whatever.
People live with lots of shame. Men live with a lot of shame here in many of our cultural contexts. Men live with a lot of shame. There's, living in, and we can't talk about this without exploring how patriarchy has informed a man's consciousness in our world today. And so there are all these ideals from your boyhood about who you're supposed to present yourself as. And you get to your teenage, you're already separated from a lot of these emotions you had as a child. And then you want to emulate the adult men around you who are very dysregulated emotionally. All right?
And I feel like the moms even sort of support that too.
Yeah.
Like I know one of our neighbors, a very specific thing happened last year where me growing up, it was always like my mom was like, "Oh, don't grow up. You're my little boy. Whatever." Yeah. And then I made friends with an African family, and as the boy turned from like 10 to 11 to 12, I showed his mom a picture of him, and she goes, "He's becoming a man." And like my mom would never say that. She'd be like, "Oh no, he's becoming a man." And she was like, "Let's go, let's get there." And that's a very different way to look at it.
Yeah. So sometimes we call it internalized misogyny, where women are like also foot soldiers of the patriarchy. Okay. So they press on these buttons in the home with the boys as well. And so the boys actually grow up believing still they have to be these macho men. They have to be these strong, silent, powerful people who have in their heads control over their emotions.
But I guess my opinion would be you can kind of be both. It's okay to be strong and big and all that stuff and be vulnerable. Sure. So what message... Is there a simple message you wish guys just knew? Like, is there a sentence? I mean, obviously there's a broad message, what we're talking about. But is there something, a nugget that sort of turns guys?
Yeah, for me, it's you don't have to be one thing.
Nice.
Yeah, really. That's it. You don't have to be one thing. Yeah. We were taught we have to be one thing.
Have you ever read like some of the samurai perspective, like the Japanese? I mean, those guys were like, they're warriors, but they had to do calligraphy, they had to write poetry, they had to do, I think they cooked, it's like, that's awesome. Well, it's well-rounded. That's the way to be. That's a great way to say it. You don't have to be one thing.
You don't have to be one thing. And because it's not even human to be one thing.
It's not.
It's not even human.
It's impossible. And that's why we are very outside ourselves, because we are trying to be what we can't be. One thing all the time. It's impossible.
So I wanted to sort of formally get into the space of addressing men and men's issues. And I know that you have done quite a bit in that regard, starting from what you say that your first safe space was with your peers as men who are going through something and who are willing to be vulnerable with you and to validate you and to help you process things as they were also processing that. I get the impression that in the process you got the sense that you could your circle of influence, especially when it comes to spreading mental health awareness, or just this group, create a larger group, a safer space for more and more men. And Darren alluded to the challenge of having to then go to the next guy who may be feeling some type of way, but they're not even aware they don't have a language for it. they're not even aware they want to face those things that are going on inside of them, because maybe they are carrying with them incredible shame and guilt. But then you feel like you have the awareness that can shed light on what is going on with them and maybe help them process and manage that. So the challenge then would be, how have you, and I think you have then actually gone ahead to do something.
I have, yeah.
How have you done that? How did you begin to create a system for spreading mental health awareness, or just self-awareness to a point amongst men, to make them begin to consider the possibility that there is something to be benefited from introspection? Yes.
Yeah. Stories. I began with my stories. And because we struggle with many things silently, particularly as men, and without other men talking about their own experiences, it would be very difficult to know how to open up. So I talk about struggles I've had in relationships before. I talk about struggles I've had in sex before. I talk about my curiosities around these things. I talk about the struggles I've had with religion. I talk about them. And I talk about also sexual abuse, which is something I also went through. You get what I mean? So self-disclosure has been the magic, because if we are sitting here and I'm feeling comfortable that you understand my pain, I don't have any reason to fear you, really.
Now, in the process, does it also mean, because I once had somebody say that the thing that self-disclosure benefits from first there being a safe space.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and this was within the context of the possibility that you had of the thing people call oversharing.
Yes.
So maybe you say something and you notice that a whole room full of people is rattled by what you've said.
Yeah.
And, there's awkwardness. Yeah. And then after that, even when you meant for this thing to be, to be treated a certain way,
sensitively,
it creates this awkwardness, and maybe guys just...
Yeah.
So the thing is, maybe these people are not necessarily ready for that conversation.
Yeah.
It's therefore not a safe space, and therefore when you disclose this thing, it boomerangs. So it means also that as you keep doing this, you keep risking so much to yourself. There's going to be blowback. There's going to be backlash.
All
there
the
are
time.
instances where, whereas this was meant to help with mental, sort of helping you with the process of growing in terms of your mental health, the blowback can sometimes injure you.
Yeah.
Has that been your experience?
Let me answer you from when I was 16. For me to begin writing poetry, I had too much going on inside me. I felt if I didn't get something out, I would die. That's how crazy it felt. Like my body was burning.
Did you cry?
I cried all the time. I sobbed on my pillow every night. And so I developed this thing of sleeping with my earphones to just, the music would soothe me. And that's one of the reasons everywhere I go, I have headphones. I'm always listening to music, if you saw them today as well. Because I want to stay intact with myself, But then, for me, speaking up was a matter of life and death. You get what I mean?
The inside's got to get on the outside.
It was a matter of life and death. If I don't get it out, it will kill me. It's like, And so, for me, that's why, for me, I view it as, this is my gateway out, And in the beginning, of course, I didn't understand much about the world and oversharing and blah, blah, blah. But I do receive lots and lots of backlash. Okay. The good part, of course, is the part we are saying, I managed to develop a system but I do, even as soon as I don't know, a month ago, I was trending in the country for, I don't know if you saw that, Awiti, like, I made a very simple tweet. And the tweet was, I took a photo of sanitary pads, which I stock in my house, and for the lady visitors that come, because menses can come sometimes abruptly, especially for people who have irregular periods. And I put the caption read, you don't have to be in a relationship to care for the lady visitors coming to your house. Mm-hmm. And that was turned into many other crazy interpretations about how I'm trying to get laid, about, I'm being Mr. Nice Guy and crazy things. And somebody came up with a story that I'm a deadbeat dad. There's a child I have somewhere that I'm not taking care of. And I'm here taking care of women who come into, it went insane. And I get cyberbullied a lot because of that vulnerability. Even talking about my childhood traumas with my father, people just wake up, feel very entitled to tell you, stop being a sob, or you love sob stories, blah, 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 blah. So that backlash is something I have come to articulate myself with. I know what it is. What helped me, I would say, first of all, is I have a very strong foundation in my friendships. Very, very strong. So, for example, that first group of the Bible study guys, they hold me down emotionally. Mm-hmm. I have a community for some male poets with whom we play football with physically every Wednesday. I have another community in the creative industry of people I talk to. I have an Instagram community, in my followers spaces where we talk one-on-one. So I am very supported by very many people, and that helps with my certainty that, I'm not crazy. By wanting to be better, by wanting to be healthier, I'm not crazy. So believe me, Charles, the backlash is insane, to be honest with you, because it comes in droves, very bad energy.
Is that mostly on Twitter?
Mostly on Twitter.
Yeah. Sometimes
on Facebook. Once in a while on Instagram, this morning, the latest one that came in.
Yeah, tell me.
Was, I posted a very short video of me doing this dance moves, and I was only wearing my boxer. And, I'm into fluidity and self-expression of the body. And this guy comments, he says, first, because I do dancing videos as well. So he says it's something akin to, first you started with the dancing videos, and now you're putting out these naked ones of yourself. You're behaving like a woman who's being fucked, and I'm beginning to get concerned. That's what he said. Exactly. So I just checked his Instagram account. And the guy is a bodybuilder, okay? And he posts pictures of him half naked, flexing his muscles.
Yeah.
And I'm like, bruh. So I go there and I ask him, so you, when you're in your gym and you're taking these pictures, flexing your muscles, who comes for you?
Yeah.
And his response was oh, you win, bro.
Yeah.
So you're
There's nothing there. There's nothing there. None of these guys would say anything to your face. There's nothing there.
There's nothing,
Don't worry about that.
So I've learned and it helps that I understand mob psychology. It helps that I've done the emotional work about myself and understanding my culture and, the euphoria that comes with being different, and the fact that as a nation, if you think of this nation as a body, we are a traumatized lot, okay? This body is deeply traumatized on complex layers, okay? And so, as a result, we are more comfortable with information that we feel keeps us to our identity. And we identify with pain so much. We identify with trauma so much, to the level that our immune system, as a nation, And that involves everybody from governance to education to finance to family to religion. All of us are in here in this body with our parts. So we identify with this trauma so much that we fear interacting with anything that takes us out of that.
It's like we have we all as humans have this overwhelming urge to be right, and if we're shown wrong, then that's a huge problem. Yeah. So if maybe you had a wrong idea, and then someone proves you wrong, and you feel small or something. Yeah. Whereas instead of just learning, but so also your experiences, it's like if something contradicts the closely held feeling of your experience that this is right, this is normal, everyone has this, or it's not a big deal. Suddenly that fear of just, I don't know, being wrong is huge, or being proved. Like I've got to the point where I feel very comfortable with like learning that it was all a mistake, or I totally screwed up, or I was living a lie. Yeah. Like it took me a while, but I'm kind of at that place. Yeah. But confronting any solidified belief, but what would be the belief that you have to confront if you've dealt with if you've never dealt with trauma? Like if you've got the trauma, it's all around you, but you've never admitted it, you've never cried, you've never dealt with it. Yeah. What is that? What is the sensation of breaking through that's so hard for guys?
For guys, so I like that question.
That's a brilliant question.
Yeah. And I will start with a story. I love stories. For my 33rd birthday, I was dating somebody. We went to the Masai Mara. And when you go to the Masai Mara, you can decide if you want to go to a game drive. You can decide if you came with your car. You can decide if you want to go to the game drive by yourself, or these guys can drive you with their cars. Mm-hmm. And when we got there, we found like the previous night, there's a story about this married couple that had decided to go to the game drive by themselves. It's a wild place, you know. Even the drivers themselves who are there don't know all the roads all the time. But then it so happened that these guys got lost in the game drive, in the wild, and it got dark and they couldn't come back. And it so happened that the wife kept convincing the hubby, this is the way we came, you know, and he was more than convinced as well that wasn't the way they came. So he kept going in circles, and they eventually just totally got lost, and they slept in the wild. I'm not sure if that marriage still exists, but, you know, as men growing in a patriarchal world, the conditioning is that you are already right as a guy. You're already right. Why? Because the symbols of power represent people who look like you. Your father was the one calling the shots at home. Authority takes masculine form. Our idea of God takes masculine form. You assume rightness. From a very young age, you assume rightness. Living in a patriarchal culture, you assume rightness, all right? And so, for many men, and especially for them, like if it's their first time to come into contact with the realization that they have to deal with something within them, the sensation of the ego being bruised, you know, like, oh, so I wasn't right all along. He fights that first, you know, like he fights that. And it's almost a human thing, you know, because it's a brain function, really, you know. But because you've done it over and over again, like you think you're supposed to be on top all the time, all that above everybody else, when it comes down to it, to realizing that, I could be the problem.
Yeah.
You know, that's really
It's just
difficult.
do you think it's that first bruise that you got to get past, that first acknowledgement?
Yeah, to
And
accept.
and then,
Accepting.
I wanted the story to end with someone being eaten. But,
Thankfully,
but, all right.
they came back.
I have a contribution to make around that, and just in fact adding to what you said about patriarchy and how it sets us up in ways which can really mess up our ideas to be flexible and adaptable to reality. The interesting thing, and this is very personal for me, for instance, is that so you are at once. There's this contradiction in you from the time you're growing up where you are supposed to know things. When you don't know, you get smacked.
Yeah.
But you don't know.
Yeah.
So if somebody was to ask you, where is this thing? You're immediately supposed to know where it is. And the person asking is also doing it because they're powerful and they want to show that they have control over you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So they will not also allow themselves to doubt that you might not know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very complex thing.
Yeah, our crew, we worked with some guys, if you remember Charlo, and when we very first started, we dealt with Innocent, and he would lie, and I was like, dude, you don't have to lie. And he's like, and so finally he came to me, he goes, Darren, you don't understand, we grew up in a situation where you got smacked if you admitted it, and you got smacked if you lied, so you might as well at least try to distance yourself. I was like, oh. He's like, I'm sorry. Oh, sometimes he'd be like, no, okay, yeah, I did. I left that behind. You know, he had to stop himself, but it was like so conditioned. It's like, oh man.
So the interesting thing is, at the same time, this kid you're smacking around needs to grow up to be in control of things. He needs to be there. He has to grow up to be the one running the show. Okay. So you're damaging this guy's ability to trust himself and trust his own sense of his reality, but at the same time he has to take charge. Now there's no point in the process of his development where he really he is so ashamed of the things he's lying, the lies and the what and the guilt, and he keeps trying to cover up even the shame and the guilt.
Mm-hmm.
By the time this guy is an adult, I think, and that's probably what that whole trauma thing we're talking about, there is no real, like, can the real Charles Adede stand up? You might not find him.
Yeah.
You might not find out who that person is. So the thing is, but now this is what I'm left with.
Yeah.
Now, if I have to go back to trying to retrieve Charles Adede, then I have to start with getting comfortable with my shame and my guilt, and it's almost, I don't know who can easily face that level of shame, because that shame is sort of installed in you from age 1 or 2.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that probably is the greatest impediment to men just going through this process of transformation. Because the other thing, I suppose, with transformation would be like, you need to tear down this entire thing you believe you are, but you're not sure what you will find at the end of it, because that is probably a new journey by itself. You tear yourself down and then you build yourself up again. I think it's a lot of work.
It is.
And then you'll not be doing it within a supportive environment where everybody's saying, let's all
keep
do
going,
this.
keep going, yeah.
Yes. So I think it's a fairly complex thing for many men.
I mean, I don't want to derail it, but I also think that maybe the only, or the, I mean, how much of this is alcohol in relation to the way the bad the ignoring the problems manifests itself in alcoholism? Because that's the story. I mean, you were telling. Is that the story that your other Bible study guys were also telling about their dads? Was that always an element?
No. Alcohol was part of it, but not for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was the worst.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've come to find out is the alcohol is a symptom.
Yeah.
It's a symptom. We still don't look at it as that here today in our culture. That is.
We sort of pretend.
Attack it as a problem.
Yeah, we'd say alcoholism is a problem.
Right,
so we are gonna get on TV and pour all this illicit brew by the chief and blah blah blah. But then, like those men are still coming back home drunk.
Yeah.
Get what I mean? So,
if you're going to pour something out, you should pour out what's happening behind closed doors.
Exactly.
Not pour out the alcohol.
And it's inside. It's really deep inside our like actually even as far into our DNA. Because if the study of epigenetics say that there's a possibility if say I'm deeply traumatized by environmental whatever things they are, and that never gets cured in my system, I can pass it on to my generation
within 3 generations
via
or
DNA,
something.
and so in the proper context of Kenya today, we are right there. Those 3 generations, it's my dad, my grandfather, and his father. And what's the period of their time? Colonialism was happening, slavery was happening, neo-colonialism has been happening.
Yeah.
So many big, massive structural changes have been happening in our environment, in our reality.
I read somewhere that they said that perhaps the biblical concept of generational sin is actually a poetic way of talking about epigenetics.
Yeah, I would agree. Generational curses, all those things we say, I would agree, because when you look at it metaphorically and you sit down with the science, it would make sense that you hear certain patterns showing up in families around how they deal with the effects of trauma. And these effects trickling down generations, And so definitely a religious person will see that, this person is like their father and they're like their mother, whatever like that, and they act in these certain ways. And if those certain ways were harmful,
you'd call it a curse.
It's a curse. It's a sin. It's a demon. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it definitely makes sense. Yeah.